think you're born a feminist, aren't you? I don't know. I mean, feminism is just the idea that men and women should be treated equally. I've always fundamentally believed that men and women and boys and girls should have equal opportunities and equal dignity and respect. So I think that's sort of always been there in a sense. But I think when I went to university, it was interesting because in some ways it was a bit of a negative experience because my first introduction, first year out of uni was, I guess it was white Western feminism from the 70s. It had a very rigid idea of what feminism looked like and what a feminist looked like. Didn't feel like it matched me, as a woman of colour, as someone who is feminine and like shoes, and I like makeup and that. I guess I was introduced to this idea that those things were not compatible with feminism and that the things that I enjoyed about being a woman were problematic. And it took me some time to then be able to reclaim the idea that you can be feminine and a feminist, that feminism can take lots of different forms and that feminism is about the freedom to be who you are. After university, I went to the Maldives, which is where my father's family is from. And I went there to work. I worked at the Ministry of Gender. We ended up doing the first ever national prevalence study on violence against women in the Maldives. And it was a really big deal, and going out to all of the islands and travelling around speaking to women and hearing all these stories. And I guess that was a pretty transformative moment because that was the moment that I knew that I was going to work on the issue of violence against women forever. That was sort of it. I think once you start to, actively learn about gender and the social construction of gender and how we define men and women's roles, and it's like you put these gender glasses on, and then you see inequality and everyday sexism everywhere. So it's and then you can't take the glasses off. It's kind of confronting, and it's kind of it's sort of in your everyday life. Often, I'm in my career, often what happens is I get hired to go somewhere, and then I turn up at the airport or at a meeting, and everyone's like, "Where's Dr. Fulu? Dr. Fulu, Dr. Fulu?" Because they don't expect to see a small woman of colour. And I've had that happen. I'm at a meeting at the World Bank and I'm about to present, and I'm standing at the lectern, trying to put my PowerPoint presentation in the thing, and they're like, excuse me, get out of the way. Someone here, I'm like, I am here to present. And they were so embarrassed. It was very funny. But stuff like that happens all the time. There's the constant questioning in the work that I do. The most common question I think I'm asked when I say what I do, that I work on violence against women, virtually without fail, men always ask, what about men? And it's, what about men? Women are violent too. Why aren't you looking at violence against men? And it is true, yes, there is violence against men, but violence against men is still predominantly perpetrated by men. And in terms of violence in an intimate relationship or domestic violence, it's profoundly skewed towards women being victims and men being perpetrators. So it's not to say that we don't work on that, but we're working on the most common form of the problem. I think becoming a mother in some ways has exposed me to more gender inequality, I think, than I have ever been exposed to in other areas of life. So that kind of really made the political personal at that moment. And I think having kids it's not something I'd planned in my life or anything, but when it happened, I just realised how gendered that whole process of parenthood and motherhood was, and how much society defines what it means to be a woman or a man around parenting. And I was working full-time at the United Nations, and I guess it was a bit of a shock how unequal I realised the world was in relation to expectations for women around raising children. And because I was the primary income earner, and you would have expected that the UN would have been sort of very supportive and had very good policies around maternity leave and supportive, work-life balance practices, but they didn't. And for example, I had to pay to bring my husband to look after my child so that I could continue breastfeeding because I had to travel for work. Well, on the one hand, the UN proposes that you should breastfeed exclusively for 6 months, but then on the other hand, they have no practices that help you do that when you're working and traveling for work. Whenever I travel, and I'm in kind of big international meetings, and people always ask me, "Where are you? Who's looking after your children?" And I know they're not asking men those questions, men who are also fathers. Yeah, so there's these kind of inherent assumptions. And I think there's also all of the messaging we get from society certainly, I think, makes working mothers feel very torn and very guilty and like they're never good enough. And I'm sure for stay-at-home mothers, they feel the same. Society is judging them in other ways. So you are constantly, I think, there is it's the idea that you can never do it right. Yeah, it's like there's kind of never an accepted position for a woman. Everyone used to call me Superwoman. And it was supposedly a compliment, right? People would say it as if this is this great compliment, you're Superwoman. And definitely the hardest thing I've ever done is to quit my whole career at that point and just go back to nothing. And think about how the fuck do I feed 3 kids without a job? And I'd been working very intense jobs. I was at the United Nations in the Asia Pacific region, and I had 3 children very quickly. My twins were born. I moved to South Africa to start a new job with a large global program funded by the UK government. I burnt out. It just fell apart. And I was like, and then when this all happened, I was like, this is fucked. I'm not Superwoman. And the fact that we try and make women think that they need to be Superwoman makes us all break down at some point. It's not healthy. This idea that women have to do it all, have it all, and look perfect while doing it. And I think a big part of it is also learning what you feel authentically compelled to do, right? Rather than following some external narrative of you should do this and this is what success looks like, to go internally and trust the desires you have, whatever they are, that are coming from some deep, authentic place, and go with those. I guess for me, courage is that you're afraid, but you do it anyway, right? I think, and I think I don't think you're ever going to get to you're never going to get to a point where you're not afraid. I think you're always afraid, or if you're pushing boundaries, and then you're going to be afraid because you're stepping into the unknown or doing things that make you vulnerable, or all of those things that are scary, but that you do it anyway. And so for me, it's been about learning how to go into fear rather than resist fear, and to kind of embrace fear and to move through it and do the work that you feel compelled to do anyway.